What's up guys, my name is Bentley Harden and I'm an art director in the Maneuver program. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use Lightroom, basically the essential trainings. There's a lot to cover since it's basically a whole Adobe app, so let's get started. Before doing anything, it's important to get to know your workspace. Becoming familiar with this will increase your speed when editing a large amount of photos at once. So let's get started on the left side. Over here we have Navigator, and Navigator is basically a magnifying glass. You can see here I'm changing like the sizes of how much you can see in the window, and I'm able to move it around just by using the little cross sign symbol that I'm just circling right here. You can just change it to fit it, fill it, or whatever you really need. Underneath Navigator is Catalog. So Catalog just basically lists the number of photos that you have in each of your collections. So the ones listed here are like default collections, and they come with the application of Lightroom, but you can make collections and they will appear here with a number of photos on the right side as well. Underneath that is Folders. So Folder shows locations that you have imported from recently. It kind of acts as like a recently added feature, so like whatever you've recently pulled images from when importing, this is where it'll show up. Below that is the Collections panel. When categorizing your images in the library, you can start a collection that acts kind of like an album on your phone. It keeps photos that you want together in one place without removing it from the original library. And then underneath that is Publish Services. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It has a panel where you can directly connect your hard drive, Adobe Stock, Facebook, or Flickr account to Lightroom and export your photos straight from the library to these locations. You can also find services just by clicking this button and browsing through the options available. Now on the right side, the panels shown aren't very important for the library. You can see the histogram, quick develop, keywording, metadata, and comments tab. The first panel shows the histogram for the image you have selected in your library. So if you click on one image, you can see the histogram, but if you change to another, like I just did, you can see how the levels change on the right side where the histogram graph is. So you can see how it's pretty high on the right side for the right image, and then pretty high on the left side for the left. So underneath that is quick develop. I'm going to select a couple photos here so you see them as 3 through 7, and I'm going to show you how Quick Develop works. So Quick Develop, you can basically, it's mainly useful for situations where there's only one thing wrong with a large amount of photos. So you can see that I've clicked on, I'm going to up the thumbnail size so you can see it better, but you can just click on different settings, so like creative, you can have like let's do vintage instant. So you can see how like it has an orange tint added. It kind of looks more like a vintage photograph. You can also do, let's try an aged photo. So you see how it just really looks like there's like a sepia like kind of like vibe. Like it really makes sense. It's just basically like a general filter that you can apply to a bunch of photos at once, and you can do this in the library without ever having to go to the Develop tab, which we'll get into in a minute. So next I'm going to tell you about keywording. So we're going to go to this image of a car, and we're going to type in outdoor, and we're going to type in outdoor and car. And so the image next to it, we're also going to do outdoor because it's also an outdoor image. And so by doing this, it'll have the same keyword, so I'll be able to look them up, and whenever I want to look up outdoor images, it'll be together. And I also did rainbow for that image so that I could just show you for the other one, but I'm going to do rainbow and portrait for the following image, and this is just going to show how you can categorize different images that are very different, but they have the same key element. So like keywording is basically just labeling your photographs so that you can find them later whenever you export them as a catalog. I don't really use this very often, but it is very useful for when you're managing a lot of photographs and you really just want to make sure that you're able to find them with ease. So after keywording, we're going to talk about metadata. Metadata is, we're going to review later on, but to summarize it, basically this tab can take one photo and its edits or the new data and apply it to a range of photos that you select. And lastly is the comments panel. I never really use this one, but basically other people's comments on an images can appear from them being shared on Lightroom's web view. This is mainly used for the cloud-based Lightroom app. I'm editing here on Lightroom Classic, but it can be useful when working on a group project, like if you are working with a team of people, it would prove to be very useful. Now to address the large gray area, or elephant in the Lightroom. This is your library, and where your images will appear in your film trips, aka rows, when you've imported them. Speaking of importing, let's get to that. Alright, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize the left menu window and press Shift-Command-I, and this menu will pop up. By pressing Shift Command I, that opens the import menu, and you're able to see a tab on the left, and on the left you can see where all the places where you can pull images from. So I'm just going to go straight down to my desktop and then Lightroom tutorial, and you'll already see the images we've been working with that are gray. So when these are grayed out, that means they're already in the library. Like, they're already in the library, you don't have to worry about them. The images below are highlighted and selected, and if you were to press enter, they would automatically import. But say you want to select a couple, like you want to choose a couple, they're not really all of them are great. So what you're going to do first is actually just click, if you click on one, you can deselect it and you can see how it kind of grays out for a second. But if they're all selected, you can click on one and deselect it, and then all of them are deselected. So for the first example, I'm just going to click on one and hold down Command and then click on another one and another one. And this way I'm able to select a couple that are in between another. If you were to click on one and then hold Shift and click on one at the end of the row, you would highlight all of them in between. So Command and Shift are the two key players in this game that we're playing right now. Let's do Command A again, and then we're going to click the check mark button so that all of them will be imported, and then press enter. So now we're back in our library, and I'm going to open up this window, and we're going to go back to all photographs. So the little catalog I was just in was previous import, but we don't need to worry about that right now. So I'm going to select this little photo of this cute dog that I took of my friend Sarah, and go to the Develop tab. So the image that you're working on is going to be the main focus, which is the center of the screen. At the bottom is the film strip, and it's showing you past and upcoming images in the sequence from your library. And on the left is the navigator panel. It's the same thing as before. It's just showing you previews. You can change how much you see while you're developing, and it can be very useful when you want to get into like the nitty-gritty details. So below that is the presets panel. This might be one of the most popular features of Lightroom. There are some default ones listed here now. And some photographers will create presets and sell them, so you just download them and you're able to put other people's filters onto your photos, and it's very simple. Say you do an edit on a photo that you really like, you're able to save that as a preset and you can apply it to photos in the future. So it's a very, very useful tool to have. Below that is the snapshots tab. Basically you can screenshot kind of where you're editing. So say you are at a point with your photo that you really like and you're like, okay, I really like where it's going, but I want to try this. You can snapshot it and then try that thing, and if you don't like it, you can open up the snapshots tab and completely bring your photo back in time and start where you left off. So it's kind of like a checkpoint almost. Underneath that is history, and history will show all the changes that you've applied. It's basically a play-by-play window, very useful. Underneath that is the collections tab. It's the same thing as before, but instead of showing you how many photos are in each collection, it simply just lists them. Now on the right are all your editing tools. At the top is the histogram again. And now that you're in the developing mode, you can now alter its histogram. If you hover over it, like you see I'm doing now, you can see that right here, you see blacks, shadows, exposure, highlights, and whites. So now you're able to move them. Like if you just press and hold and drag, you can see how the shadows and the blacks are actually moving in the image and changing. And everything you do here will be listed below, but I'm going to show you that in a second. So I'm actually going to open up the basic tab, and you can see how all the images are changed, and I'm going to bring it back to the import on history, but basically this is just shows to prove that the histogram actually works. So after the histogram is this bar of icons. Here you can crop and rotate, lightly edit small blemishes with the brush tool, utilize red eye correction, and make and edit a mask with the remaining 3 tools. The mask is useful if you just want to lighten or darken like one part of your image. Editing with a mask can't get like really specific since you can only change the settings under the basic tab. So let's look at that really quick. So to edit with a mask, you're just going to click on the right icon, and now you can see how this menu drops down, and we're going to just brush over this doggy really quick. We're going to use him as a model. Isn't he so cute? So now that I have him selected, you can click Show Selected Mask Overlay Off, so that way you can see the changes, and I'm going to change the exposure, and you can definitely see a change here. If we're going to change the temperature now, I'll get into more about what exactly this does in a minute, but just to show you like exactly what it does. You can also take the mask and drag it around, so if there's like a little bit, like if you were almost there, like you were just a little off, you can change that and move it. But we're just gonna delete this mask and close out that menu and bring it back to the import, so we're back at the beginning. So here's the basic tab. The first thing we're going to change is the temperature. So the temperature affects the white balance of the photo. So if your white balance was off, you can edit it here. We're going to make it a little warmer. Tint also helps with the white balance. We're just going to slide it until we get about right. And underneath that is exposure. Exposure is basically how bright or dark your photo, your whites and darks are. We were slightly underexposed, so we're going to leave that up. The contrast, you can see how the contrast affects the photos here. It mainly deals with how harsh the whites and the blacks are, but we're just going to bump up contrast a little bit because of how many darks we have present in our image. Highlights are the whites of the photo and like how bright they are appearing. You can just see how they change with the menu slider. We're going to bring the highlights down so we get more detail in the background. Shadows will bring out basically the small details in the blacks. So you really, like if you have a really dark image, like a lot of blacks moving around, you might want to bump the shadows up just to give it a little more detail. Whites are the brightest brights, the biggest parts of your image. Like you're going to check the histogram and make sure that your whites are touching the side of the histogram. So to have a properly exposed image, you're going to want the whites to be showing, like the white side to be touching the right side of the histogram and the blacks to be touching the left side of the histogram. This just means that your photo is properly exposed. Moving on down to texture. Texture basically just can give it kind of like a gritty feel. It honestly just adds texture. It's exactly what it says. You can really smooth things out, or you can make it look super gritty. Clarity is just what you think it is. We're just gonna bump it up a little bit. Maybe just leave it right here. Dehaze will get all of the darks and the shadows and kind of compress them together. It can look good for some images, but you want to be really careful with how often or how much you use. Vibrance and saturation, it's very easy to get these two confused, but vibrance is basically saturation, but without leaving out details in the colors. I can't think of a situation where you might want to use saturation over vibrance. Of course, there are always circumstances where that might work, but I would most likely always stick with vibrance, but just remember to play around with it. So the tone curve also changes the same things your histogram does, but it shows it as a line graph. Some photographers use the S-curve rule as a guide to editing. You can experiment with that here and select default settings and alter them as needed. HSL stands for hue, saturation, and luminance, or brightness. On hue, you can change the exact hue that your reds, oranges, yellows, and so on show. This can be helpful if you're taking an outdoor image and the grass appears more yellow than green. Just bump over the two sliders and you're good. Be careful to check for shadows and highlights and see that the colors still blend together. Saturation does the same thing as before, but you can bring out the saturation for specific colors instead of all of them. Luminance does the same thing as vibrance, but also for individual hues instead of the entire image. Split toning allows you to give your highlights and shadows a shade or a tint. You can also give your shadows or highlights more power over the other by altering the balance between the two. The Detail tab works with sharpening. I usually bump the amount up a little over half and bring the radius down to the smallest option. It's different for everyone, but for detail, I'll bring it up some just to give it a little clearer look, and then mask it completely just to smooth it all over. Oh, and also the reason why I moved the navigator looking panel for under detail is just because that's where the focus of the photograph is, so I want to make sure that that has the most detail possible. Noise reduction can work if you shot at a high ISO and need something to kind of hold the grain together, but this will usually not be changed. Lens corrections is a tab that I never touch, but it's nice to know what it does. Under manual, you can distort the image by either making it concave or convex. Diffringe will barely do anything unless you apply this effect. Vignetting will give your image an old-timey look and move the focus to the center of the image. So transform is for different images. So I'm going to go on the film strip and find a photo of an old friend that I have. I took their grad photos, and so I got them in front of Denny Chimes, and you can see here that it's a little wonky. So I'm going to go to the crop, and you can see how it's not even between the middle pillar. So I'm going to angle it a little bit just to kind of straighten it out, just a tad, and apply it. And now we're going to go back down to the transform, and you can see the horizontal moves the photo almost like you're pushing in. That looks about even. So now we're going to do rotate, just making sure that it's right, perfect, aligned. Now we're going to go back to crop and make sure that all the white background is out of there and press enter, and here you go. Now Denny Chimes is perfect, and you can see how the eye line goes from the red hat all the way down her arms, and it just looks really nice now. So that's how you use the transform tab. We're going to go back to our original image and move on down to effects. Effects can make your image appear as if it was shot on film by adding grain. So I'm not going to add any here because it already has enough grain as it is. The final tab is calibration. This focuses on the reds, greens, and blues of the image as well as the tints of shadows. This will help finalize everything you've changed and solidify and smooth over your edits. So you can see here where the shadows, I'm changing the tint, and you can really see it in the darks and the shadows of the image. And like I said, the histogram, you'll be able to see it change. With red primary, you can see how it's almost like taking the hues in the HSL tab and kind of compressing them with the reds, orange, and yellows. It's really bringing those all together. It's also really fun just to mess around with. As you can tell, it's like kind of cool to look back and forth. But for this photo, I'm just going to slightly edit the reds, greens, and blues just to make sure that it kind of looks more like a normal photograph, and just tighten those up. Now that was a lot, and if you shot over 100 images and need to edit all of them, that can be really daunting. What's so good about Lightroom is that whatever you do to one image, you can do to them all. Personally, what I do is this method of copy and pasting. By clicking Command C, a menu will pop up, and this is what it looks like. So I don't usually select spot removal or crop because that's different for every image. Also with local adjustments. Local adjustments is what a mask is also called. So local adjustments, it just means mask. It's nothing different. And then transform and crop, spot removal, those are all very specific to each photo, so I never apply those when I'm copying my settings. So now you click enter, and now you have your settings all copied. You can go to the next photo and click Command V, and you see how it just got brighter, it just looks better. All of the changes I did, you see the sliders, you can change as much as you want to here, and it won't affect the previous photo. You just pasted your settings on here, so it's kind of like a preset, but you have a lot more you're able to control. You can just click next and do it to the same photo. I'm also gonna kind of change the rotation a bit, and just click paste, and that's it. That's a really easy way to get through a bunch of photos and also check and make sure that you're making sure that every detail is perfect. Now we're going to go back to the library panel, and it looks just the same as before, but you can tell that we have our images edited because in the bottom right corner of each icon you can see a little plus and minus sign. That just means that the exposure has been changed. So let's say you want to edit a photo in Photoshop. So you're going to click on it, go to Photo, Edit in, and then Edit in Adobe Photoshop. I would always do Edit a Copy with Lightroom Adjustments so it keeps the edits that you made. So we're going to leave that and press enter, and it will pull up Photoshop. And so you see it in Photoshop here. It just brought it straight from Lightroom to Photoshop, so you didn't have to use your desktop as a middleman. It's just really quick and easy. It's just quick. So we're going to go back to Lightroom, click Command A to select them all, and so now we're going to export. So to export, you're just going to hold Shift Command E, and it's going to bring up this profile. And so now this menu pops up. So you always want to make sure that you're exporting to the right location. You can choose a location. I'm just going to click on desktop and then Lightroom tutorial, so this folder that I've made. And I'm going to do a new folder, and I'm just going to make it edited so that I know that these are the images that I edited in Lightroom. And you're going to want to make sure that the file naming is correct. So you never, sometimes if you change your file name and you export another catalog after that, it'll still be that same file name, so you just want to double check. For file settings, and make it JPEG, make sure the quality is at 100, and everything looks good here. So I'm going to click export, and now my images are exporting. So that's just about everything with Adobe Lightroom. If you think I missed something, or if you want to go more into depth about something, feel free to reach out and I'll be more than happy to help. Until then, thanks.